program for food law and policy at UCLA School of Law, a newly created program dedicated to studying and advancing law and policy solutions to improve the modern food system. Previously, Kim served as a food policy coordinator for the City of New York, an appointed position in the mayor's office. Kim serves on the Los Angeles Food Policy Council's leadership board, and she is also the host of Eating Matters, a weekly radio show dedicated to food policy topics on the Heritage Radio Network. Joining Kim will be Alana Siegel, a summer fellow at the Resnick Program for Food, Law, and Policy. Alana received her BA in Psychology from Lafayette College in 2013 and is currently a JD MBA student at Washington University in St. Louis, where she's expected to graduate in 2017. At Washington University, she is the Associate Manager Editor for the Washington University Journal of Law and Policy. As a 2L staff editor, Alana's note is NAFTA largely responsible for the obesity epidemic in Mexico. She was selected for publication and is set to appear in the 51st volume of the journal in early 2016. So with that, I would like to go ahead and start with Lana on Greywater and alternative waters for community and household gardens from there.
Great, thanks for having me. I'm going to share my screen. Just a second. Let's see.
Hi, everybody. This is Kim, and I am going to turn it over to Alana shortly. Just wanted to give a little bit. I'm sorry. So this is it Laura who's going there?
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I think we had a little bit of a glitch with the slides, but I think we're going to hear from Laura first. So sorry if that wasn't clear. I don't think the agenda was showing up on the screen.
Great, thank you.
So should I go now?
Yes, Laura, please take it away, and apologies to everyone for the little glitch there.
Okay. So my name is Laura Allen with Greywater Action, and I'm going to talk about reusing greywater, which for those of you who aren't familiar, greywater is water that was already used once in the home. It's coming from showers and baths, sinks, and washing machines. In California, greywater is lavatory bathroom sinks. It's not currently considered kitchen sink water. And on the slide, you can see there's a home and there's different fixtures, a bath, showers, washing machine, and those are going out to irrigate the landscape. And greywater is a really great strategy for reducing water consumption at the residential scale. It's really not the best strategy in community garden applications, since community gardens typically don't have a lot of fixtures producing greywater, and greywater can't pass over property lines under the current regulations very easily. So greywater is a great strategy for backyard gardens, not so appropriate for community gardens, though there's always exceptions. And I'm going to show you a little bit. There's two considerations that are very different with greywater than any other source of water, because the water has been used in the home. It's come into contact with products and people's bodies, and it can have germs in it and things that aren't healthy. So we need to make sure that the greywater is safe for our plants as well as safe for people. With the plant considerations, you want to use products that don't contain high salt contents and don't contain boron or chlorine, because those are harmful to the plants. And there's lots of products people can use. They just need a little bit of education to make sure they're choosing the right thing. And if they do that, the water is of suitable quality to irrigate any plant that wants to be irrigated. And then we have the other health concerns with greywater. It's not potable, so we don't want people to drink it. We don't want people to have direct contact with it. So greywater systems should send the water out and soak it into the soil. It needs to be subsurface in California, so it's never surfacing, visible, it's never running off the property. And it also contains nutrients, which are really good for our plants and our gardens, but they're a source of pollution. So greywater should never enter a storm drain system or be used if the property is too close to a creek or waterway. And in terms of food production, greywater is safe to use on any food plant so long as the food is above the ground, since the greywater is soaking in the ground. You don't want that direct contact with the water, so root vegetables are not suitable, or other plants where the food is touching the ground and might contact the greywater. Their greywater systems can be extremely simple. You can see the picture on the left. There's a sink. The water is flowing through the pipe by gravity into a basin full of wood chips called a mulch basin near a plant and irrigating the plant. And that's a greywater system, extremely low cost, extremely simple. And they can also be extremely high tech and expensive, as you see on the right. That's also a greywater system. And the more complex systems are installed in high-end residential situations, and they can function pretty much like a standard drip irrigation system with different components that are specially suited for the greywater. They have filtration, filters are automatically cleaned, they have controllers, all of that. And the cost is extremely different. The potential risk in terms of misdesign of the system is very different, and the regulatory oversight is very different. So I'm going to show you a couple of pictures of the simple systems that are really affordable. They're easy to install. There's actually some incentive programs around the area now to help people install them. And they're, again, for the residential application. The first is called a laundry to landscape. It's a really simple system where you're collecting the water from the discharge hose of the washing machine. And so you can access the greywater without changing the household plumbing. You have a valve so you can control the flow. One side sends it back to the sewer, the other side directs it into this new irrigation system that you've created to irrigate the landscape. This picture is kind of conceptual. You're not actually seeing all the parts involved, but you get the idea. In California, this system doesn't require a permit if it's in a single-family home and you're following basic guidelines. So it's a really simple and affordable system. In Southern California, Pasadena Water and Power has an incentive program to help people install this. And there's a couple other water agencies starting to support people. Here's, you can see what it looks like. It's similar to an irrigation, like a drip system, but all the materials are bigger so you don't have clogging problems. And this is all going to be buried and below ground when it's finished. So basically the water is soaking into the ground near the plant and it's all covered up by wood chips and then or soil, depending on which part of the system you're covering. When it's done, not a lot to see. You just see a nice landscape. That system is really well suited for trees and bushes and larger perennials. It can be food or ornamentals or habitat plants. And here's another one. This one is coming from showers and baths. With the other types of greywater systems, you have to alter the household plumbing, and so that triggers a plumbing permit. So there is going to be a permit requirement here. And you divert the water before it's contacted with the toilet, which is definitely not safe to reuse in your backyard. And you can see that diversion happening. The valve allows you control of the water, either sending it to the sewer if you're using unhealthy products, or someone has an infectious disease, they wouldn't use that water, or turning it and sending it out to the landscape to be irrigated. These systems also can be pumped. Sometimes people have an upward sloping yard and they can't have a gravity flow system, so they do need to pump the water up a hill, or sometimes they have to pass over a lot of hardscape. And the pump systems are very similar. You have to alter the plumbing, put in a diversion valve, send the water out, but now there's going to be a small tank. It's not storing the water. Something really different about greywater compared to other water supplies is you can't store it. It needs to be used within 24 hours. Otherwise, the organic material starts to decompose and it gets really stinky and it's not a very desirable source anymore. So this tank is not storing it, it's just collecting it. There's a pump inside that automatically engages as the tank fills up and it sends it out to the landscape. Currently, it's a lot more difficult for people to get permits for a pump system because there's more concern when you have pressurized non-potable water versus like unpressurized gravity flow non-potable water. Even though the system can be completely separate from the potable supply, there's concern that maybe future ownership will change and people won't understand it and they might tap into it thinking it's potable supply and contaminate the city supply, which would be terrible. So there's a lot more oversight. It's currently very difficult for people to install pump systems with a permit because the oversight is pretty restrictive. So that's something we need to find a good balance for, of protecting public health but not being too restrictive that everyone ignores the laws, which tends to happen. And the last kind is the high-end residential. These ones, the filters are backflushed with municipal supply, so there is a connection between the non-potable and the potable water, so there needs to be cross-contamination protection. These require much more oversight. They're much more complicated and more expensive. but they can really function like a typical drip system. Their cost is much higher. The previous ones were about a 1 or 2 day job installation, low end $200 in materials, high end $4,000 for a big labor-intensive professional installation. So they're not too expensive. They can be very low cost. The high-end systems are more like $30,000. They're much more expensive, and they're pretty much only installed in new construction. So I'll kind of end there and just end with this house and seeing how the residential systems can be a really great source of water, particularly for fruit trees, berries, the more perennial type of food plants. They are automatically functioning. People don't have to remember to water them, and they can reuse this resource that currently is being wasted. So I know there'll be time for questions later, so I think I'll stop there and
Thank you,
talk
Lana.
more about it later. Yeah. Laura.
Thank you. That was wonderful.
Great.
I mean, I'm sorry, Laura. I apologize. I was looking at Alana's name. Next, we want to go with Kim and then Lana, and I apologize again, Lana. Let's go ahead with Kim, and we'll go from there.
Hi, everyone. So I just wanted to introduce this topic. We got some input from folks who we work with in Los Angeles and identified this as a potential research topic for the summer. And what we were really looking at was, with so much momentum behind urban agriculture in the policy world, with a lot of new policies that are supportive of urban agriculture, we wanted to understand better what the implications of the drought for urban agriculture were, and specifically nonprofit types of urban agriculture and community gardens, and what the how water restrictions were or could impact urban agriculture. And Alana was our summer fellow, and she really focused on this topic, and so I'm going to turn it over to her to share what some of our preliminary findings of her research were, and I'll let her take it from here.
Thanks, Kim. So I guess to dive right into it, with the goal of understanding what water restrictions apply to community gardens and how pervasive the understanding is among practitioners of what water restrictions apply, our research included a review of different levels of potentially applicable water restrictions. So we looked at, the state level, the city level. We also looked at the recently adopted Model Water Efficient Landscape Ordinance and some pro-urban agriculture policy background. We know there are a variety of types of urban agriculture, but our research, as Kim said, focused on small community-serving urban agriculture sites, which we defined in our paper as sites that are nonprofit, community-based, or non-commercial. In addition, although we analyze water restrictions and other policies in the state of California at large, our paper focuses on the applicability to urban agriculture in just the city of Los Angeles. Before I go into detail on the background research, I want to note for you our core findings, mainly the Emergency Water Ordinance, which is the current authority for setting water restrictions within the city of Los Angeles. It does not clearly distinguish between the types of landscapes. This highlights a gap in city policy objectives that ultimately could have a negative implication for urban agriculture. In addition, the applicability of the restrictions remains largely unclear to practitioners at community-serving urban agriculture sites, as we saw from that initial poll where most people do not know what the effect of the drought is. Out of about 1,200 urban agriculture sites in Los Angeles County, as documented by this Cultivate LA report, which is an extensive report produced by urban planning graduate students at UCLA, we focus on a smaller subset of sites, which excludes community gardens, among a number of other types of gardens. And as many of you know, there are a number of benefits associated with urban agriculture, including the increased access to healthy food for low-income individuals and a number of potential environmental benefits. The ones that are most relevant to good water management strategies include the potential for to decrease the urban heat island effect, as well as for urban ag to act as a green infrastructure to assist in stormwater management for those heavy rains that are so infrequent in LA but happen sometimes. Turning to the policy landscape for urban agriculture, I'll briefly discuss a few policies that reference the need for the expansion of urban agriculture. So some of the more urban ag-specific policies provide direct ways to facilitate the expansion of urban ag. These include the Urban Agriculture Incentive Zone Act, which is an elective policy at the county level, which enables property owners to opt to transition a portion of their property into use for agriculture in exchange for a tax break. So this is not yet implemented in Los Angeles, but it just evidences a pro-urban ag stance. Similarly, the curbside planting ordinance allows property owners to use the city land that borders the front part of their property to plant food or engage in other landscaping activities. And lastly, the Los Angeles Department of Water and Power's Schedule F provides for a lower water rate for community garden sites. In addition, there are some broader policy goals, both in the Los Angeles Sustainability Plan and the health elements of the city's general plan that mention the need for an expansion of urban ag, but they don't really provide specifics about how to achieve those goals. They kind of just say that urban ag is important and it should be expanded. With this pro-urban agriculture landscape in mind, we turn to the drought response in the state thus far. Most of the restrictions target limiting unreasonable uses of water, as estimates suggest that in some areas, up to 80% of all urban water use is used for outdoor watering. At the state level, Governor Brown's executive order from April of this year directs the State Water Board to implement strategies to help the state reach the mandatory 25% reduction set forth in that executive order. How this plays out is more clear if we look at the drought restrictions at the county level. So counties are directed by the State Water Board pursuant to the governor's executive order the percentage reduction needed by that county to help the state overall achieve the 25% reduction rate. So the county supplier in turn mandates its local districts to reduce water by the percentage related to that particular district's 2013 water use. So for example, Malibu, which apparently used a lot of water in 2013, have to reduce their water consumption this year by 36%, while other districts that use less water in 2013 may have to reduce their water by a lesser amount. Turning to the city, we have the mayor's executive directive, which actually predated the other restrictions in the state. The directive calls on residents in Los Angeles for a number of voluntary reductions, but mainly defers to the implementation and enforcement of the city's water restrictions to the Los Angeles Department of Water and Power. Pursuant to this authority, the Department of Water and Power enforces what is called the Emergency Water Conservation Plan, which was originally implemented in 2010, but still today provides the mandatory drought restrictions currently applicable for water users in the city. As recently as this June, this ordinance was amended to add additional phases just in case the severity of the drought requires enhanced water use restrictions, but thus far we're still on phase 2, which was present in the 2010 version of this document. So turning to the actual language of the water ordinance, which is where we spent the bulk of our time, according to the currently applicable phase of the ordinance, which is phase 2, there's a general rule which limits landscape irrigation to a 3-day per week maximum. And then within that maximum structure, there's more specific limitations which vary based on the type of watering device used, which is interesting that it focuses on the device used and not what is actually being watered. So here we see that some types of hoses are subject to a maximum of 24 minutes per week, whereas others are permitted up to 90 minutes per week. As we turn to the third bullet, there's a lack of clear guidance regarding how these restrictions apply to community gardens, since watering for food sources is only mentioned once in an exception to the general rule. This section of the ordinance suggests that if food sources are watered with drip irrigation systems, they can be watered anytime before 9 a.m. or after 4, as opposed to, as we saw in the second bullet, the more specific timing restrictions based off of the type of water device. So because vegetation, and also because vegetation is not defined in this ordinance, it's not clear whether watering a fruit garden with a handheld hose also is subject to the exception, or really what applies is unclear there. However, despite the the undefined terms that create some confusion. What is clear from the ordinance is that there's a clear focus on the type of device used for watering as opposed to what's being watered. It's also clear that drip irrigation is preferred, which makes sense because drip irrigation systems bring water directly to the root of the plant, minimizing water waste and maximizing absorption. To further facilitate our understanding, we conducted a pilot survey which gathered baseline information about how water is used at community gardens. Because the group of respondents is limited in size and it's self-selecting, we turned to the results of the study as purely for anecdotal information, and we definitely suggest more research explore these areas of how urban gardeners use water, source water, fund water, among other things. But our main takeaway from this process is that while it's possible for different sites to have different applicable water restrictions, there's a very clear lack of uniform understanding amongst these community gardeners of what applies. Lastly, I'll talk about some of our preliminary recommendations. In looking at the available policy landscape and the applicable water restrictions, our primary recommendation is that there is room on the table for more dialogue between policymakers and practitioners. And we look forward to receiving your input at the end of this presentation about these recommendations. But we broadly recommend to incorporate a more comprehensive discussion of watering food sources into the emergency water conservation plan, in line with the clear priority of the restrictions to minimize unreasonable uses of water. We agree with the implied position in the model water efficient landscape ordinance, which advocates or sets a hierarchy of water uses, among which using water for edible gardens is presumed to be a reasonable use of water. In addition, we recommend that stakeholders be more involved in this discussion and that the ambiguities in the water restrictions be clarified explicitly for practitioners' use. Further, in considering the clear preference for drip irrigation, we would like to see a drip irrigation incentivization program for urban agriculture sites, maybe a rebate or some other type of incentive. I know the city of San Bernardino has a similar rebate for drip irrigation. It would be great if Los Angeles could adopt something like that. Lastly, we advise a continuation of the investigation into the potential use for gray water for landscape irrigation for ornamental uses. And with that, I'll turn it back to questions and comments.
Great. Thank you so much, Alana, for that wonderful presentation. Before we kick it over to the discussion, I do just want to pull up a couple of more polls to get a sense of what folks, so we're wondering what folks need in terms of resources to better educate the public on water security for community gardens and household gardens. So we're wondering, do you need fact sheets, FAQs about policies and regulations, fact sheets about sustainable water strategies, expert speakers to come speak at public workshops like master gardeners or people like Laura Allen who do workshops around various all across Southern California and I think across the state as well. Do you need further education for yourself or is there some other resource that you would like that would help you to promote sustainable water strategies? So these folks can go ahead and answer, and I will give you 5 seconds and close the poll. So it looks like a lot of folks would like fact sheets and FAQs about policies and regulations and about sustainable water strategies, also expert speakers for public workshops and further education, and then some others. So that's great. That's very helpful, and we will try to get those resources out to you all. And I'll pull up one more. What resources do you need to implement sustainable water strategies in gardens in your jurisdiction? So do you need education, technical assistance, funding, support from leadership, or something else? I'll leave this up here for a few seconds and let you all answer, but just wondering, we want to, this is sort of a starting point and we want to be helping to provide everybody with the resources that they need to take action coming out of this webinar. So I will leave this up here for about 5 seconds, and I'll go ahead and close the poll. So it looks like folks, 45% would like more education, 64% technical assistance. Funding is popular 100%, and support from leadership and some others as well. So that's helpful for us to get a sense of how we can help folks to take action. Now, I know we've got a lot of folks on the line who have a lot of expertise and have been experiencing the drought in their communities and have been finding some alternative water sources. And I think we have a pretty unique example from, I think Naomi Billups is on the line, and who has been doing some really innovative work in San Diego with the detention centers. So if we can make sure that Naomi is off of mute, I'll let you go ahead and share an example with us to kick off our discussion.
Good afternoon, everybody. This is Naomi Billups. I'm the nutrition manager for the County of San Diego. One of the things, actually, can you give me a heads up that you can hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Sound great. Thanks.
Okay, so a couple years ago, actually more than a couple years ago, we started implementing horticultural therapy programs within our juvenile detention facilities, mainly focused on edible plants and starts. One of the things as the drought issue is coming forward is the usage of water within the county facilities. So one of the ideas that we have been looking at, and especially since we're looking to expand agricultural production on possibly adult detention facilities, looking at a 4-acre farm. I know LA County has a very large agricultural production on their correctional facilities, is to look at the gray water produced on those facilities. There's a lot of laundry going on. There's a lot of showering going on, and how we can collect that gray water to really irrigate the non-edible landscaping around the county properties in the correction facilities, and then really use the potable water for the.
Does that make sense? So you kind of know why I'm doing this?
So that's something under discussion here, is how to really mitigate the water costs if we're going to scale up ag production on the correctional facilities with the reduction of cost for the unedible landscaping water using gray water. I know all the counties have correctional facilities, and some of us are using those correctional facilities to do ag production. So I was just wondering if anybody's had some experience using that technique.
I open this up for a discussion, and if anyone can answer Naomi or start our discussion out that way. And this, I want you to share your experiences and your questions. This is a time for us to have an active discussion and go from there. So let's go ahead and questions for Naomi or the speakers. Well, I have one for Naomi. I think this was a really interesting example, and yes, it made me start thinking of all the detention facilities that we have, and with to reduce water, and you're seeing dead grass or dead shrubbery, and what a great way to be able to keep that green, and also encourage and educate to start bringing gardens onto facility sites and show that water that would have been used for some items can be used now for ag. So I think, what were some of the strategies that you had to overcome when you were putting this together, and first steps?
Well, first steps was to educate the detention facility staff on safe garden practices and how to really implement agricultural growth within, and it was a very small scale at first within the detention facilities scheduling. When we started off with the juveniles, we really hooked it up to the educational component as well as the detention facility component. It took a long time to get it established, as in any bureaucracy, as we all know on the phone, but it is thriving now, and now we're headed into that component of scaling up ag production and really trying to analyze using that gray water for the non-edible landscape. So it's still in discussion period. I know that, Alana, your last bullet, your recommendation was to utilize the gray water for non-edible landscapes, and I think governments in particular, and in particular correctional facilities, has a huge impact and ability to do that, as well as comply with any regulations that we have to comply to.
This is Laura. I just wanted to clarify something about irrigating edibles versus non-edibles. And the levels of risk. In the residential application, it's safe to use gray water on edibles because people, it's their own gray water, they live in the same house together, it's going in their own backyard, and it's all subsurface, of course, but when you get to like the larger scale where there's multiple people's gray water that don't live in the same house together, that's a totally different situation where edibles would not be the appropriate choice.
Thanks. That's very interesting. And I love that example about the detention center, especially thinking about that's one of the few environments where you really have enough gray water to use to really be impactful. There's a question that came in through the Q&A about using rain barrels in a school setting. Apparently this is hard to broach with the janitorial staff. Is anybody aware of an effective implementation of rain barrels in schools, and how if so, how were they able to get the leadership on board for something like that?
I know in San Francisco they have rain barrels in schools. I don't know how it happened, but I know there's a school called Cesar Chavez Elementary that has a whole bunch of rain barrels.
Great. So that's an example we can look into and try to find out information about how they were able to do that. I know there was also a question that came in for you, Laura, about asking for clarification that I think it was you that mentioned that LA City had a discount rate for urban gardens. Is that right? How can we get more of that?
A discounted. I mentioned some incentive programs to help residents install gray water systems in their home for their backyard landscapes or front yard landscapes, but they weren't. Yeah, it was residential.
Okay, perfect. So that's for residential use. And then, Alana, you had mentioned the incentives in San Bernardino City for drip irrigation. I wonder if we have any folks on the line from San Bernardino, and if so, if they have any experience with that. And otherwise, wondering more generally from your research, Alana, do you have any insight if other folks wanted to get those type of incentives passed in their jurisdictions? Do you have any idea of, how was San Bernardino able to be so successful in that? What might be the challenges folks would want to prepare for in trying to get something like that passed?
That's a great question. That was outside the scope of our research, so I'm not actually sure how they got it passed or how difficult or easy that was, but it's definitely an important question to ask.
This is Gail. There is
Great,
something
thanks, Gail.
There's something that just came across our desk probably 2 weeks ago. We were asked to partner as a Department of Public Health with the City of Paris, and they are putting on the city land a demonstration community garden. showing different ways of ag that you can grow, from hydroponics to raised gardens to bed gardens to all these different aspects that you can go, and then take it into, they're taking our NEOP dollars and taking it into nutrition education and cooking. And one of the interesting things with one of the main other partners is a municipal water district. And so they will be working on
I have mixed emotions. It'll be a good opportunity, but it'll definitely different. I'm used to this culture.
The irrigation and that aspect. And so also this municipal water district has been, I know everyone was interested in funding. They were able to write a grant and will be putting in 40 school gardens throughout their water district. So, it's getting creative and looking at different people who are the right partners. I think it's collective impact that really begins to make things happen. Has anyone else had those experiences?
Well, I'm not sure. I haven't heard of other folks with those exact experiences, but that's a great example. Thanks for bringing that up, Gail, and certainly something we should look into for helping to get more school gardens across the region. I know that I've heard, and I think we have Christina Hall on the line, who's been dealing with some issues with the community gardens down in Orange County. And I know that you've been trying to get creative in terms of getting more support from leadership to prioritize. When we heard about from the speakers the sort of hierarchy of water and needing to prioritize edible plants. And so I'm wondering if you could share a little bit about the work you're doing there in Orange County along those lines.
Hi, Holly. I am on. Yes, on October 9th, we're going to be holding a legislative roundtable where we're going to talk to all the levels of policymakers. We have state and federal and county board of supervisors, and we're hoping that we'll get some municipal folks on board to attend this roundtable where we're going to talk about how the drought mitigation efforts that they have put into place are actually reducing local food security and reducing property values. And it does have to do with that water hierarchy. We know that community gardens, any kind of edible gardens, already use less water than lawns, but we have communities where we've seen even more stringent regulations on the community garden members than regular residences, which is kind of crazy. But on top of that, it's that water hierarchy that, I can wash my car in the street as long as I have a hose nozzle, but I'm not allowed to water my trees enough so that they're not dying. So we think that it has a huge impact on public health, not just from the food access, but also from walkability in our communities. If there's a lot of dead trees, people aren't going to want to walk because there's no shade. We think that there's a public safety element that all these trees, and a tax element, all these trees that our tax dollars have gone to be put in are now dying, and so that's a waste of money, but also it's going to become a public safety issue if we do get all the rain and wind and storms that are being predicted. Then we're going to have people at risk because those trees are going to fall down. So that's kind of what we're hoping to have. We have a landscape architect that's going to be there. We have a community gardener there. We'd like to ask our policymakers to tweak water regulations a little bit at the levels that they're at, to realize that food is a vital impact for water, and that our trees on our parkways are also important as well as water use is concerned. Does that help explain it?
Great. Yeah, no, thanks so much for sharing that. And I know and we're going to be posting up some resources at the after the webinar at the website URL that I shared earlier. So we'll have some resources up with the recording, and some of the things that I came across in pulling those together were specifically about the sort of Save Our Water campaign has now incorporated a Save Our Water and Save Our Trees campaign, and trying to highlight the importance of keeping our trees alive because they have so many public health benefits. So that could be maybe a helpful resource for helping people kind of articulate that hierarchy argument where it comes to trees specifically, and I think we can extrapolate that onto edible plants. But I think that's great that you're tackling that there in Orange County and really addressing this issue that we heard about really in great detail in Los Angeles, of the kind of disconnect between the different policy priorities, where on the one hand there's this big push for community gardens, but not having the support for the water that they need. I'm wondering, Alana, thinking about your research, such a helpful, detailed look at Los Angeles, and you did say that you had kind of looked at different areas across the region and state as well. I'm wondering if you have ideas about how we can apply the lessons learned from the city of Los Angeles across the Southern California region, and if there are other studies that have been done, or tips for if folks want to really dig into understanding the details of their regulations, sort of where they might start?
It was honestly a little bit of a mess. They all kind of intersect and stem from the state executive order, but how they all relate is kind of messy. So it just takes a lot of patience. But otherwise, I would go to the water website or your water supplier's website. They should have some sort of somewhere in the website should have the restrictions that apply. Although some of the websites I've dealt with are less clear than others or not really updated.
It's basically,
okay.
This is because what you see is local discretion as to how to meet the state's targets, and so different articulations of how that's going to be done in different places. But I really think that the number one tool for dealing with this is basically kind of dialogue and asking, and particularly I think if you are a local health department and you're interested in the issue, calling the water department as, you know, policy or government official to government official, and trying to understand, well, what's the applicability, what can we tell community gardeners, this is a question that we're hearing. I think that kind of back and forth is really helpful, because it's really just a little bit murky, and it's probably just more conversation and attention to the issue that can help yield more clarification for everyone.
You know, this is Gail. I think you're absolutely right. And I think it's about these partnerships. And as I was sitting here in the city of Riverside, we have Parks and Rec. The city's Parks and Rec department is embracing community gardens. And they're really embracing ag, but they're embracing community gardens in Parks and Rec land. And it's really interesting. We have a WIC site, and in the same WIC site there's a park, and it's owned by Parks and Rec, and they're doing community gardens, and they're utilizing the master gardeners from the University of California at Riverside. So I think that, and it's amazing how some of these people come up, or organizations come with, I can put this funding towards this, or I can do that, and it's what you end up with an end result.
That's great. That's a wonderful example of collaboration across agencies to help everybody meet their goals. I see we have a question from Tracy Delaney on the line. Is your audio on? Do you want to go ahead and ask?
I hope so. Can you hear me?
Yep, I can hear you.
Okay, great. First of all, I want to thank the speakers. Both were just excellent presentations. I had a specific question for Laura. I had heard or had seen about a model ordinance in Arizona, and it was any of the new development was required to have a bulb out for use of gray water. I was wondering if one, if you had heard about that, but two, more importantly, do you know of examples here in California where we kind of flip it into the default as being access to gray water?
Yeah, I'm familiar with that, and it's in Tucson. It's a city ordinance, and their new construction is required to have a stub out, which means the gray water must be accessible, so future owners of the building can install a gray water system. Construction that has slab on grade construction, the gray water is buried in the cement, so our construction can make it extremely difficult to use gray water, and the ordinance is designed to prevent those problems from happening. In California, there's been a handful of cities that have recently put out ordinances that weren't quite as comprehensive, but were intending, the intent was to move forward a little bit. And I'm part of the Decentralized Water Policy Council, and we actually are circulating a draft right now of a model ordinance for California that I can share with people in the near future if you're interested, that would have requirements. And we hope that cities will adopt something like this, because new construction is the prime time to make it really easy for the future. You never know who's going to buy the home and what kind of landscaping. There's a lot of variables, but the minimum, the pipe should be accessible, so it's not a huge economic hurdle to install a system.
Great, thank you. And we would like a copy of that when you're ready to share with us.
I just want to say
yes,
thank you. If are there some more questions, Holly?
I was going to say there's just one more question, and then
okay,
I think we'll wrap it up. So the one more question is about rainwater catchment for community gardens. Folks would like to see more of that, and they're wondering if they are allowed to use that water across property boundaries. I know, Laura, you said with the gray water, you really have to keep it on your own property. How about with rainwater catchment? Can that be shared?
That's a great question. I believe the answer is you're not supposed to discharge your rainwater onto another property, though I think that would be an exception that would be much easier to get than the gray water scenario. I do know people do it. I don't actually know if the gardens that have done it have gotten official permission to. But it's very common to use like little sheds and things as more demonstration for a rain catchment system. So I would just ask the local agency, tell them the plan. If the property owner next door gives giving permission and their gutter's right there, they possibly would grant an exemption, or maybe it is okay in that area. If people want to see the code, it's Chapter 17 of the California Plumbing Code. It discusses rainwater collection.
Great, thank you for that. And I know at the poll we took at the top of the webinar, a lot of folks said they either did have a community garden on their local health department property, or that they were wanting to or working on installing one. So I think when you mentioned sort of demonstration type projects, that could be a really great way for health departments themselves to sort of model some of these different alternative sources with using rainwater catchment and gray water on appropriate landscapes, and also having some edible community gardens to create more food for the community. So I don't see any more questions coming in. I do want to turn it back over to Gail to kind of close us out, but also before I do that, just want to say a quick thanks to everybody. This has been a great conversation, and I've learned so much. Gail, do you want to close us out?
Sure, I'd be happy to. I just want to recap potential local health department actions. One of the things is I think so I'm grateful everyone participated in the poll, because I think we need to look at all these different areas, and we can't do all of the answers in just our 60-minute webinar. So I really want to look at how we can work together, looking at possible funding, education, perhaps resources. And definitely best practices among our members are great, and support the actions and the panelists, and keeping up to date with what they're doing and where they're moving ahead. And there's just, fabulous resources that we have. And with that, I just want to remind everyone that these calls aren't just only here and now. They're going to be monthly, and there's time for rich discussion and to talk about challenges and what is needed. There's also, if you go to the website that you see on the screen, there are wonderful at phasocal.org. There's many other webinars that are going on throughout the months on different areas regarding water, because this year we're focusing on water. So there's the water crisis strategies for public health leaders, the water drought for environmental health, and then the climate and the food we eat. So, and if you missed one of these, you can go listen to it and get the information. And also, I'm referring a lot of my colleagues to the webinars just to go back and look and see. So this is a very rich source and resource. And I just think I'm looking forward to the monthly calls after we finish the series to look at how do we achieve some of the answers that we had on the polls earlier in the call. So I just want to say thank you so much for attending today and being a part of this rich environment, and looking to our next call that we have water security for community and household gardens and farms. And we'll have that conversation again in October. And if you have any questions, you've got Holly's contact information there, as well as Naomi and I would be happy to help you as well. So refer a friend, and we hope you bring more to the table in October. And thank you, Holly, and all of the wonderful speakers, Laura, Alana, and Kim. Thank you very, very much. And Naomi.